Laura does not cry for the Glass Menagerie, or PFFD, Proximal Femoral Focal Deficiency, for the child you always wanted to be. Cast number 1, Fiction underscoring memory. The writer, as unreliable as any memory, the first time it is remembered. A spirit more than body, still their voice is heard, remembering. But by chance or suggestion, whatever they say is breathed to life, wherever you may be.
The narrator, a physical presence, as opposed to the writer, living in the center in media res, still aligned with the writer, justified.
Laura, poetic verse, in the space of fiction and memory, time stretching for as long as it needs until the writer, satisfied, ends the fermata.
The chorus, wind whispers, drifting nebulous as voices from youth often do.
Cast number 2, Memory Overlapping Fiction. Tom, a clenched fist conductor, director of staged time, finding the right frequency to a memory they would swear is not their own.
Their narrator, age 23. The physical embodiment of the spirit whose task it is to keep the unruly stage directions in their place. Although, this could speak for all of the characters in any casting.
Writer, age 14. Reliving the scene endlessly, as fiction may always be turned to the title page. They are not Laura, but see themselves in Laura.
The chorus, many winds or a singular tolling, as voices from dreams often do.
Cast number 3, Memory Overlapping Fiction. Tennessee Williams. Being a memory play, Laura Does Not Cry can be presented with unusual freedom of convention. Because of its considerably delicate or tenuous material, atmospheric touches and subtleties of direction play a particularly important part. Expressionism and all other unconventional techniques in drama have only one valid aim, and that is a closer approach to truth. When you look at a piece of delicately spun glass, you think of two things: how beautiful it is, and how easily it can be broken.
The gentleman caller, a nice, ordinary young man. At the climax of a play that is not this play, I visit the Wingfield family. I dance with Laura and, swept up in romantic numbers and a love of love, I kiss her. And in doing so, I also seem to have stepped on a glass unicorn. It breaks, but Laura, in her kindness, gives me the unicorn as a souvenir.
PFFD. A childhood illness has left her crippled, one leg slightly shorter than the other and held in a brace. But this defect need not be more than suggested on the stage. And, stemming from this, Laura's separation increases till she is like a piece of her own glass collection, too exquisitely fragile to move from the shelf.
The mother, a woman of vitality, clinging frantically to another time and place. Her characterization must be carefully presented, not copied, for she is not paranoid, but her life is paranoia. Although she is unwittingly cruel at times, there is tenderness in her slight person.
Cast number 4, Broken Fragments of the Writer. Screen on. Deja vu feels like connecting the mistakes of a previous self to a future dream.
Laura Does Not Cry is a poetic memory, performed using details of Ben Kim Paplham's personal experience of disability and borrowed details of Laura Wingfield from Tennessee Williams' play, The Glass Menagerie. Laura Does Not Cry exists as two connected but distinct forms, as a poem and as a play, neither superseding the other in value. As a poem, it feeds the individual in intimate comfort, the language forming and reforming as the audience needs, for the sake of visual recollection. As a play, it invites collaborative storytelling between the performance and the audience. The visual and audio stage conjure personal memories and memories of fiction. Even more simply, this is a story about being alive.
The ceiling consists, by her rough estimate, of 196 tiles. It is difficult to find perfect pairs for the bisected tiles, but his guess seems to be accurate enough.
PFFD is a birth defect in which the upper part of the femur is either malformed or missing, causing one leg to be shorter than the other, a difference that creates functional problems with a child's ability to walk and can stress other bones and joints in the body in an effort to compensate. There are several treatment strategies for children with PFFD. However, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. A multidisciplinary team of pediatric and/or orthopedic surgeons, nurses, prosthetic experts, and therapists must collaborate to determine if leg lengthening procedures, surgery, or prosthetics, or a combination of all, will offer the child's skeleton the best chance to increase their functionality.
The scene is memory and is therefore non-realistic. Memory takes a lot of poetic license. It omits some details. Others are exaggerated according to the emotional value it touches. For memory is seated predominantly in the heart. The curtain is therefore dim and poetic. The narrator is watching a rainbowed yacht drift by, setting the lake on fire, and thinking on the fragility of life, seen as a menagerie of interdependent moments. It is cold, and the narrator remembers something they will write in the future, how Chicago rain is different than hometown rain, and something else. They are here, wearing a fashionable scarf of feminine charm, because trench coats look treacherous on a person of child size. The narrator is an undisguised convention of the play. They, for that is what they refer to themselves now, think of the he as who they are in memory, which is why Laura never refers to herself in the first person. After all, when the described scene took place, the speaker had never read the Glass Menagerie and thought Tennessee could only be a state, and had never heard of Madison Ferris, the first wheelchair user to play Laura, or any leading role on Broadway, for that matter. And, of course, they had never heard of Stella Young, the comedian who coined the term inspiration porn. They take whatever license with dramatic convention as is convenient to their purpose. How rude.
I present to you truth in the pleasant disguise of illusion. I turn back time to a quaint scene, the middle class of America content within a school for the paralyzed. For how else can you define a system so persistently immobilized? My legs fail me. This is the social background of the play. I am the narrator of the play and also a character in it. I am the most realistic character in the play, being an emissary from a world of reality that we are somehow set apart from. But since I have a poet's weakness for symbols, I am using this character also as a symbol. I am the gentleman caller, a nice, ordinary young man. The other characters are my mother and Laura, who is both a she and a he. The nature of this synthesis will be understood later. I think the rest of the play will explain itself.
Screen on. Red Rock's mountain view depicts one of the few times the narrator has felt there has to be some God out there. because nobody creates beauty without wanting to share it. What it does not or cannot depict is their cousin's wedding, the reason for the trip to Colorado, nor the tequila shots they had downed the night before. It had been raining. The narrator's sister is out of camera shot. Julie's Cafe, under a setting sun, shows the diner where the narrator had spent many mornings to grab breakfast and coffee. Leg brace, plastic and metal, is a cheat. Yes, that is the thing, and yes, that is the narrator on their back. But they hadn't worn the thing regularly in over 3 years, 2 by official doctor recommendation, and they had to stand on a box, itself balanced on top of an ottoman, to retrieve the thing from the top of the closet, where it had been saved for some unknown reason. Perhaps now was the reason. Even so, the narrator was surprised by how much it compressed their waist, how loud the joints were, and if it had always looked so inelegant.
While our eyes can still see the ghosts of the images, why don't we take this moment to picture ghosts from the Glass Menagerie? These ghosts are largely focused on Laura Wingfield, fetalized upon a sofa, hand unfurling around a broken glass unicorn, sat in a wheelchair, or submerged underneath bathwater. As we progress through Laura's life, we see with certainty that a childhood illness, life, has left her crippled, one leg slightly shorter than the other and held in a brace. This defect need not be more than suggested on the screen. The snapshots in our mind should become abstract, depicting symbols of fiction, such as blue roses and fire escapes and rotary telephones, but also reality, such as an x-ray of a child's skeleton with PFFD or a leg brace, plastic, metal snaking around the waist and down over the left foot. These images of Laura peel off the page. We are now viewing holograms of bodies, heads drifting in a celestial shade of blue.
There are 4 people standing here. The writer, twice fold, Mr. Tennessee Williams, and still images are one person. The narrator, the writer at a younger age, the gentleman caller, and the kiss are another. Laura, the narrator as a boy, PFFD, and the scene form the third. The final character is the chorus, consisting of doctors and icons, but most predominantly, maternity. If the audience is confused about why there are 4 people inhabiting one body, or one body split into 4, remember that we always return, as reference, to emotional memory, the first condition of the play.
Laura does not cry for the Glass Menagerie. Laura does not cry, maybe for broken memories, half-formed in hoarding space. Within jam jars, a slip of torn notebook paper, a reminder for the world. Mother sells unspeakable women's underwear. Laura's mother, who says,
You're not crippled, Laura. You just have a little defect, hardly noticeable. When people have some slight disadvantage like that, they cultivate other things. It's not enough for a girl to be possessed by a pretty face and a graceful figure.
and the rest of Laura's life was a tolling.
The scene begins with Laura in a classroom, in the days before AirPlay, HDMI, or YouTube, the days of burning hot projectors, greedy light bulbs, dirty translucent sheets, and expo markers that never worked. If Laura turns her head, the sun shoveling coal between the projector vents blinds her. She's starting to sweat. Her leg is starting to sweat beneath her brace. She scratches it. A poster at the front of the classroom, which subconsciously draws attention away from the teacher. The poster is of a woman in a tight ponytail, leaping over hurdles on a track field, with metal limbs where her legs might have been, overshadowed by block letters in white. No excuses. A glitch in the scene. A rippling through Laura's body, a hologram toggling between Laura and this boy, trapped between being a boy and something else. This is the narrator, but younger. The narrator wraps their scarf snugly around the boy, aged 14. The boy taps his pen on the notebook paper and rubs his finger, the only one on his left hand, against the smoothness of the desk. He looks up, aware of our gaze, stares at us from across the page, before raising his hand, the right, to be excused for the bathroom. He stands up. His shoe, the left, the one with the 6-inch lift, clunks against the floor, a solo drag step, and catches the desk. He stumbles. The teacher pauses her lecture to ask, concern worn in that female authority of all mothers.
Are you okay?
Yes. But why can't Laura's mother see grace and figure do not complement a young woman with a physical disability not hardly noticeable, tangible? Played by a wheelchair, the first Broadway lead defying inspiration porn to and for the delight of critics, but not those critics, like Laura's mother, who says,
Little defects cultivate other things.
Or maybe that is his personal notebook paper, a doodle, a reminder of his mother's voice.
Are you wearing your
And Laura is wearing it, her unicorn sitting in the kitchen cabinet.
Laura washes her hands. The girls' bathroom is silent, save for the water playing in the sink. She wets her fingers, shakes off the excess, brushes her hair behind her ears, and adjusts her glasses. She reaches for a paper towel, but something in the mirror stops her. It's the boy. He waves. She waves back. A few droplets land on the mirror, drifting. She doesn't remember being Korean, nor a boy, but suddenly she has an intense memory that she could have sworn was not her own, of sitting in a doctor's office looking at an X-ray of a unicorn skeleton she must assume as her own.
The doctor, she says,
You may be in a wheelchair before you were 10 years old.
and Laura is reminded of how very 14 she is, but not now. In this now, the doctor has adopted a neutral face, and Laura's mother has adopted the same, but less convincing. Waiting expectantly for Laura, who has been ill-prepared to speak on behalf of little boys everywhere, to say something. In this now, a reaction must occur, one that may determine Laura's attitude for the rest of her life. In the accepting of raising something, raising permission to be broken.
I think about Stella Young, her lecturer calling out nameless strangers for congratulating her for
managing to get up in the morning and remember my own name.
Should she cry? Laughing would be inappropriate, she realizes. Mother wouldn't take her seriously. And the skeleton, the one hanging inside a translucent screen, burning by its own sun, but still making Laura sweat, is waiting too. That's okay, she hears herself say in the boy's voice, a shyness that feels treacherous. The doctor and Laura's mother share a knowing look. But just to confirm for the whole room, Laura's mother, she says,
She's too exquisitely fragile to move from the show.
I think of Madison Ferris. When I was 22, she became the first wheelchair user ever to be cast as a lead on Broadway. Ferris happened to play Laura Wingfield, and during that time, it was a minor big deal in the theater world, and she was quoted as saying something like this.
I realize without advocates, I wouldn't be able to do half the things I do now. But when people say I'm inspiring, I honestly don't know what to tell them. I'm doing what I love to do.
Laura exits the bathroom. She makes it 2 doors down the hallway before she feels the unicorn's horn snap, and she is on her back before even sensing pain.
Existence itself is not achievement. I'm reminding myself. In a different play that is not this play, I might even say to Laura, Laura, somebody needs to build your confidence up and make you proud. In 2012, a few weeks after I turned 17, and 2 years before the video on the screen, Young published an essay titled, "We're Not Here for Your Inspiration."
Inspiration porn shames. It's based on an assumption that disabled people lead terrible lives, that we need some kind of extra kind of pluck or courage to live. It tells us what you expect us to be and puts the responsibility for our oppression squarely at our feet.
What inspiration porn neglects is that disabled people cannot choose which abilities they need to get through life. Who can? But I challenge the idea that the non-disabled can accurately portray the disabled, because the non-disabled, as a community, do not know the fear that you were born only to die young. But that is not something you can turn off when the screen does.
It's victim blaming. It says that if we fail to be happy, it's because we're not trying hard enough.
Screen off.
I have been told by strangers, often church strangers, that I am brave, and that my mother, for adopting me, is very brave, and even more so for adopting someone who needs to be brave. And I think that if they knew how many times I negotiated with God for a body that could be the athlete my mind knew it could be, then they would know that I didn't choose to become an artist. It was the only thing my body could do.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Laura is on her back.
11,
She has begun counting the ceiling tiles.
14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19.
To Young, I say,
1,
I have failed you. I have shamed myself.
5, 26, 27, 28, 29.
When I see someone with a disability that is subjectively worse than mine, I start to think that I don't have it as bad. Sometimes I catch myself. Sometimes I don't care.
6,
And when I am telling someone about my disability, I start to wonder if I am sounding too bitter about my troubles, or taking away from their troubles, or even worse, searching within myself for that wellspring of inspiration porn. I am guilty of masturbation.
68, 69, 70, 71.
Sometimes I believe I have achieved something for blinking a starlight, walking without looking down at my feet, forgetting to forget about my gait and just simply see.
85, 86, 87, 88.
Laura
81,
knows. She too is exquisitely fragile, and fragile things are put on the shelf in case we want to study them later. Aren't I a curious study? Today, I tripped down the stairs and sprained my foot and couldn't help but wonder at the reason. And in 2014, the same year as her talk we saw on the screen before, Young wrote a letter to herself, imagining herself at 80 years old.
80. It's a long way off from where I write to you now. 50 years, in fact. I learned the truth at 17, that I was not wrong for the world I live in. The world I live in was not yet right for me. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I started changing my language. I've never thought I was going to die young, but I'm aware, sometimes painfully so, that there are people who do. By the time I get to you, I'll have written things that change the way we think about disability. You will write some fiction in which the central character is a disabled girl, because fuck knows that wasn't around when you were growing up and desperately searching for characters you could relate to.
14 days after this was published, Young died of an aneurysm.
191, 192, 193, 194, 195, 196.
I have been told, often by church strangers, that when people die young, it's because God couldn't wait for them to reach heaven on their own, which makes God guilty of inspiration porn and gives me something else to add to the negotiation table, because I would have liked to have met young before God.
Disability doesn't make you exceptional, but questioning what you think you know about it does.
As we see Laura stretched out in the hallway, remembering the memory that is not her own, we grow aware of how silent it is, save for the chorus whispering in the wind, tolling alms in ragged breaths and irregular palpitations.
You will live, Laura. You and your fears, they will live forever. But remember, the cross isn't where Jesus died. He died when Judas kissed him. There's some convergence so beautiful. It makes you want to count to 196. Have you seen them yet? You will, I promise. In the most unexpected places, in the rain-soaked mountains, or the green eyes of a cat, or the world inside a place meant to break bread. You will see this and more. You are in a hallway, Laura. You are only resting. Only resting.
Laura wonders if a teacher will find her first or a student, if she should yell for help, but the classroom is at one end of the hallway and the bathroom's on the other, and many doors in between. And for Laura, cell phones haven't been invented. But what is most surprising is that no one, not one person, has needed the bathroom in all this time.
The narrator is walking across the fire escape now.
Laura, in a broken cry, wounded in her mind's eye, sees the writer striking an image of a unicorn horn and a shattering of glass.
And the kiss that reminds Laura of a menagerie and reminds myself while drifting over black water, collecting memories of nothing and everything, that even exaggerated fears are still fear.
This is the kiss that Laura sees herself for the first time, and still something desirable. And before the death of hope passing into reality or into fragments of something yet to be desired, and the breaking of something to die again, as alive as something undesired, wrapping a broken thing around a stranger's hand. Now is the glass broken. Now is the cry of despair. No, that is not. This is not her life. Her life is in St. Louis.
At her typewriter.
At her escapes. Walking to the writing lounge, the coffee shop, the midnight train, the open mic, the waiting for the gentle call, the toll of death themselves.
Walking in winter?
See the penguins, lunch, the movies, to walk on bridges for the sake of them being there.
You have been deliberately courting pneumonia in that scarf. Where did you walk? Laura, where did you walk?
The awful suffering look like the picture of Jesus's mother.
Oh, are you wearing your brace? Laura, are you wearing it?
This is the now that Laura remembers bracing for a kiss. A gentleman caller Laura did not wish to wear, kissing her out of a love of love. Introducing her to something unspoken and inevitably broken. Now is the cry. Now the cry remembers her mother who says,
"You don't know how much damage you might be doing to your legs. You can't take any unnecessary risks with them."
Life is an unnecessary risk.
Listen, Laura, there are days when life tells you to get on your back and count the ceiling tiles.
This is the kiss that remembers plastic pinching her waist, not as a friend, as a pinched nerve, not as a friend, as a tired parent separating a toddler from a doctor's office, a bruising, an ugly raw browning where a hip socket should have been, and the stench of sweat on plastic and chafing skin and metal plucking at body hair, which cannot be helped, according to Laura's mother, who says,
"Don't be silly. Please, Laura, please listen. Only women shave their legs.
This is the kiss that remembers. A school is a good place as any to die. A body prepared for burial with no undertaker or priest to deliver the last rites of shame and freedom, of the miracle, like Lazarus's leg, reliving a different now. The now that is paper thin bone fractures of doctors and mothers.
You may be in a wheelchair before you were 10.
In this now, Laura is 14, has beaten the odds by 4 years, proving that her mother's fears were unfounded. He wore the brace today, and still, Laura found herself lying in a dead hallway with nothing but a crippling defect of the mind swirling around doctors' pacifications and his own private estimations that her physical abilities had peaked at 14. The unicorn means something, and he has failed to take advantage of an able-bodied spirit. This is the now. This is the now. This is the kiss that Laura remembers.
The narrator, from across the fire escape in a time not in the now, has returned to the scene. They reach down to rescue Laura from the ground, but, in doing so, involuntarily say,
This keeps you from feeling comfortable with people. Somebody needs to build your confidence up and make you proud.
A glitch. The narrator recognizes this line as the gentleman caller, but they did not mean to summon voices from their youth.
Yes, this is the kiss of lying in a dead hallway, of discovery, of desertion, of invisible prophecies and injuries, of knowing how joyous death feels when its anticipation is over.
The scene has reached its end. The narrator and Laura are back together, and side by side, we can clearly see that this has been a simple case of exaggerated fear. For how else could the narrator have walked to Laura from the fire escape? Laura wraps the scarf around the narrator and returns to St. Louis. The chorus exits.
And I take her place. How do you talk about Epiphany without trumpets? Of porcelain, born in fire, needing an hour longer than it was given. The heat is just steam, just smoke, condensation on a shower curtain draped over the apron, hovering above the water line, as I am, floating, breathing, barely above the surface, keeping my eyes closed to the eternal vibrations inside my skull and praying to nothing alongside the rhythm of my fingers stirring the air, rippling at my feet, missed memories left by the tide. Of a school hallway becoming a car, becoming a waiting room, becoming an x-ray, coming into my own, becoming to rest until the ceiling looks something less like a bedroom and more like time folding mountains into sunsets. With time, I thought I would outgrow bathwater, outgrow sunsets and sweaters and shoes for something on my lips to leave. There it goes. See it? See, it's returning. I once brought up this scene with my mother, and she said she didn't remember it happening. None of my siblings did either, which is not to say that I should expect them to, but to say that sometimes I forget that I am more aware of myself than I like to believe. It's nobody's fault, but the water's grown cold. I sit up, stand, Pull the drain, draw back the curtain, and step out.